You would not believe the motherlode I just dropped. And that's how I like to keep it, leaving not a trace that I was ever here, let alone that I just birthed a creamy behemoth from my cavernous bowels. Nothing is worse than stinking up the shared toilet at work, or the toilet at a party, or your lover's apartment. Of course, flushing removes the graphic evidence. Maybe 2 or 3 flushes if your skid marks are as tenacious as mine. But what can be done of that subtle scent of a 300-cow dairy farm? Aerosol air fresheners aren't the most effective option, or the healthiest. Trying to mask the stench, giving you a nice blend of ChemLab carnations with just a touch of feces. So, how do you make the world believe your poop doesn't stink? Or in fact that you never poop at all? Poopery. Poopery is the before-you-go toilet spray that has proven to trap those embarrassing odors at the source and save relationships. Simply spritz poopery in the bowl to create a film on the water's surface that actually traps the odours in their porcelain prison. And when your little astronauts splash down and make contact with the film, they release poopery's pleasant aromas, so all those around you can smell as a refreshing bouquet of essential oils. Yes, it is a real product. And yes, it really works. We've sold over 4 million bottles. On Amazon alone, there are over 1,000 reviews rating it 4.8 of 5 stars. That's a better Amazon rating than the iPhone 5. If it doesn't completely stop your stench from spreading, send it back for a full refund. Our unconditional stink-free guarantee. Who stinks?
Hi folks, John Cordisco back again with another great chess video. This is a heck of a game. It's from the 6th Bilbao Chess Masters final being played in Spain, and it was played today on October 10th, 2013. This is round 4. It's between, as they call him, MVL, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave is white from France, number 17 in the world. He's rated 2738. Against Levon Aronian is black, rated number 2 in the world. I should say ranked number 2 in the world, rated 2797, just on the cusp of 2800, the new magic number. It's a heck of a game. It's going to be in English versus a King's Indian, which is always exciting and always great. It's a interesting ending. For those of you that like endings, don't go ahead because you'll miss the game. Anyway, folks, here we go. C4, knight f6, c6, knight f3, knight c6, g3, typical stuff. We'll breeze through it a little bit. They both castle, and d3. This, you can tell, it's going to be an exciting position when you get English against the King's Indian. It's always fascinating. h6. It pretty much wants to cover the g5 square. That's kind of the idea here with the h6 move. b4. For those of you that are wondering if it's worth it or not, if knight takes, knight takes. So black loses a center pawn and white loses a wing pawn, so that's why the trade isn't that good for black. d6 to guard that pawn, and then he goes rook to b1, of course, now to guard it because the pawn on e5 is guarded. a6, a4, knight e7, bishop a3. Interesting. I'm not so sure if I would have put my bishop here, but who am I to second guess MVL? It's a great player. c6, c5. Interesting might have been a5 and then bishop e6. After c5, rook e8, e4, bishop pinning the knight against the queen. Queen just moves. Not a big deal. No doubled pawns, of course, because a Fianchetto bishop would just retake. I got my Fritz 13 computer on off screen, even though I did analyze the game earlier. It's about a third of a pawn advantage for white, so we'll say it's even. If I'm not mistaken, when you start the game, white has a third of a pawn advantage, so it's even. Knight to d7. You're going to see some interesting knight moves for black. Knight to d2. Knight c8. Now I have no doubt at all, these guys are still in theory. They're still in their preparation. After knight to c8, queen to c2. I'm surprised you don't see much more action on the king side for black with his pawns. As typical King's Indian. Maybe he's just waiting for the right moment to go here. Now that the light squared bishop can't really harass the king. Oh, sorry about that arrow. I was just pointing to the king. This bishop can't really go anywhere to harass the king. So I think f5 at a proper moment would be worth it. Bishop f8, c takes, knight takes. It's going to be interesting to see how white defends this backward pawn here. Knight b3, b5. See a lot of pawn maneuvering now. h3, and then bishop back to e6. Interesting though, if he had gone bishop to c1 instead of h3 and then h5. After bishop e6, rook f to d1, pawn takes, knight to b5, threatening the dark squared bishop. Now I know I see this a lot in my tournament games, and I see it a lot in the elite level games. The pieces are being maneuvered around, pawns are being pushed. There's still a lot of pieces on the board. All 8 minor pieces are still here. All 4 rooks, both queens. And there's 12 pawns, so it's pretty crowded. And what usually happens, you'll see a pretty good exchange, excuse me, and then all hell breaks loose. So we'll see how it happens in this game. Bishop to b2, he saves the bishop. Bishop takes, queen takes. Now right now this game is dead even. Give or take a little. Interesting. We've got, well, let's just do a little recap here. We've got one isolated pawn here and one here. White's up what I call the minor exchange. He has a bishop for a knight, so he has the bishop pair. But right now this light squared bishop is just biting on granite. He's biting on his own pawns. We're going to have to see how this works out. The only thing I like in this position is the fact the queen is right on the bearing on the king. c5, rook to b8, queen to a2. I think maybe interesting might have been pawn takes, knight moves, queen to a2, knight to e2 check, king, knight takes, rook takes. And believe it or not, even with white being down the exchange, it's pretty close to even here. I don't know if I'd like that scenario for white, to be honest with you. Queen to a2, c takes, rook to c6, king to g7, and d4. For those of you that are wondering about rook takes a6, that's a big loser for white. What happens now is, I'm just looking at the computer. You move pawn here, queen to a1, queen to c8. Yeah, it looks bad. So those 3 pawns aren't so free. b3, back up the queen. Queen to b1. If you got queen to a1, e takes, bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes. And if black can keep this pawn and eventually have this pawn come down, he's in a hell of good shape. Queen to b1, not so good. E takes, If knight had taken, same scenario, but queen goes to a5, and then bishop to a7, queen takes, rook to c7, and that's a pretty good position for black, to be honest with you. It's tough. That b-pawn for black's going to be hard to stop. Right now, Aronian's in the driver's seat. He's up 2 full pawns. Bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes. Now he's only up a pawn, but I like this position very much. How is MVL going to stop that b-pawn and the advance of the a-pawn? Of course, we see the knight here as a blockader on the a-pawn, but he might sit there for a while, the fact being that black does not have a light squared bishop. And her opposite color bishops on top of that. Queen to a5. Interesting might have been bishop e7, rook to d5, rook to b4. But that was a computer suggestion, not my analysis. Rook takes, queen takes. There's that blockading knight gone. And here is where Maxime LaGrave stumbles. He's getting beat pretty bad right now. He's down by over 2 points. And oddly enough, the next move, e5, double question mark, was actually the computer suggestion. That's how bad his position is. I think the only way what he had, I think a drawing chance, at least by the computer, because this is so complicated with the double rooks and the bishops. It says rook on c to c7 as 0.00. And I tend to agree. How is black going to defend the f7 pawn? Frankly, let's go through the scenario. Rook c to c7, queen to a2, rook takes check, king to g8, queen to d3. And it's dead even. The problem is, if he goes b2, queen to d7, that draws. But MVL didn't see it. e5, rook to e7, saves the day for black. Rook here. He's concentrating really hard on this pawn. Queen to a2. I mean, you're I know Maxime LaGrave is a great world-class elite player. He's fairly young, but he's very good. And here you are, you're white. You're playing the Bilbao Chess Masters final in Spain. And look at your position. And to make it even worse, on the other side is Levin Aronian. My personal opinion, one of the best players that ever, at least in the last decade, that should have a spot in the World Championship. I hope he qualifies one of these days. I think he deserves a shot. As they say in the United States, you're SOL. After rook d to d6, queen to a2. Aronian stumbles. To give you an idea, on move 33, the score is almost a 3-point advantage for black. After queen to a2, it's a 2.5 point advantage for white. That's a 6-point swing in one move. The move he should have made was b2. That secures the win, because after e6, queen to a1, and white is doomed. So now Aronian stumbles. Rook takes check, f takes, queen takes. White is clearly up, has a clear advantage. clear advantage. King to h8. Bishop d5. The noose is tightening around Black's king. Aronian at this point has got to be beside himself. He had the game won and he threw it away. Let's see what happens. Rook to g7. Queen takes. Rook to h7. I think the winning move right now is queen here. Clearly, Black's king's on the run. Unfortunately, I don't know if it was time trouble or not. This is move 38. MVL plays queen to e6. Double question mark. If he had played queen to g6, bishop c5, queen to f6 check. And you can see Black's in a lot of trouble. After queen to e6, queen to b1 check, king to g2. Now the game's almost back to even again. Guys are going back and forth, back and forth. They had to be in time trouble. I didn't watch the game. If he'd gone king to h2 instead, rook to g7, rook c4, queen to h7, I think saves the day for Black. The queen comes back just in time. The computer shows it as dead even after that scenario. They had to have been in time trouble. Rook to g7, rook c8. I think it would be instructive at this point for all you endgame fans out there to, as soon as one move is made for each side, pause the video and to see what you would do. Now you're going to have the luxury of probably a little bit more time. The moves are probably going to get more accurate from here on because we're on move 40, which is rook to c8 for white. Rook takes, queen takes, rook g8. Multi-purpose move, helps the king, guards the bishop. Queen to b7. If bishop had taken, queen to e4 check, king to g1, king takes, queen to e6 check. Small advantage for Black. Probably a drawn game. If you had queen takes a6, king h7, queen a7 check, bishop g7, and that's a huge advantage for Black. Granted that technically the material is even, 3 pawns for a piece. There's no way white can hold this. After queen to b7, queen to h7. Queen comes back for the rescue. He's going to give up his pawns. Right now, if somebody's keeping track, I forgot to mention, Black's got a rook for 2 pawns. And he's only got a 1-point advantage. That doesn't bode well. White decides to take the pawn instead. Smart move. That was the first choice of the computer. Get rid of the pass pawn. Queen to b8 was the second choice, but queen to b3 was a much better move. Rook to g5. I think Black's starting to come back in the game a little bit. Queen to e3. This is going to be a fascinating ending. Queen e7, f4. Now the white pawns are starting to advance. And I'll tell you the truth, I think it's looking a little better for white. He's got 3 pawns for a rook, and he's only down a half a pawn in score. They're all connected, and they're all passed. When was the last time you saw 4 connected passed pawns? And Black, maybe he's ace in the hole, maybe not, is this a pawn here. Rook to g7. Now this is where I think MVL stumbles. It's the computer's first choice. I don't care for it. Is f5. He probably should have went queen to f3. Needs to consolidate a little bit. I think it's easier to play for white than it is for Black. I think it's easier for Black to make a mistake. After f5, queen to g5. Now what are you going to do? How are you going to guard your f5 pawn? He has to take, takes. Black's starting to crawl back in this. With those queens gone, it's a lot easier now for black to defend and play. Pawn pushes. Bishop g7, you start going after him, e6. Bishop c4 doesn't really help for move 49 instead of e6. Because after a5, black's, you can't stop the pawn. You can't stop them all. With the king on that side with the rook, he should be able to hold the pawns. Black's going to win. After e6, bishop f6, king g3, he finally gets the king up. a5, h4, rook g8. I hope you're stopping between each move to see what move you would do. This is a fascinating endgame. g5, king g7, king f4, rook h8, king g4, rook b8, g takes f6, king to f3 instead. Wouldn't really accomplish much because after a4, you can't stop it. King takes pawn. Now there's a bishop for 2 pawns against the rook, but oddly enough, even after black gets rid of his bishop, he's got a better game. e7, and this is where white resigns. If he had gone h5 instead, rook to d8, e7, king takes, bishop e6. After e7, black went a4, and that's when he resigned. I thought it was a hell of a game. There's a series of miscues on both parts. So even the elite world-class players go back and forth in the same game. These games are complicated. It's the old adage, it's not, you make a mistake as long as your opponent makes the last mistake. I went through that game a little quicker, but I think if you go back over it again, you'll learn a lot on endgames and how they work. Anyway, folks, I hope you enjoyed the game. I want you all to remember, if you think chess is just a game, you're not playing it right. And thank all of you that subscribed in the last few weeks, many new subscribers, and thanks for the thousands of views that I've received. I personally appreciate it. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.